Good morning, guys, or should I say more good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the Gemara Shir. We started off on 3b and we're just clarifying a couple of issues. What I would suggest we do in this particular case is we go to a position where we can start again with a bit of some summary questions from yesterday. Just one thing before we ask the summary questions. On page 17 of the Art Scroll Siddur is the bracha that we need to say, the two brachas before learning Torah. So just remember that in future, especially when the shir starts earlier in the morning, please God, when this ban of quarantine is lifted, and I found it here. Just one thing, I'd like Gavin to repeat his question, because I believe both Gavin and Marco had a question. Marco, Gavin's question. Gavin, repeat it in your own words, and we're just going to repeat the answer here.
Okay, so my question is basically, man does so much damage, causes so much damage, yet there are only two toldots that actually are mentioned, which is spitting and mucus, which is the one, and sleeping, which is the other. You would expect a lot more toldots, specifically because of man causing so much more damage than an animal can.
Okay, I think that's a brilliant question. I think it's a very valid question. What we're going to do is just explain very simply an answer or a point of view regarding that. So generally, whatever destruction man causes is the of mankind. You don't need all the toldos to actually mention all the possible creative way that man has created damage over thousands of years, because you would need volumes of books. That's how destructive man can be, both to other men, and when we say men, we include women, mankind, as well as to the property of his fellow. So every time that man is mentioned, we're talking about the of man and all its subsequent damages. When we mention these two contexts of toldos, they were in context to two basic principles. The one principle, when we discussed the sleeping man as a possible tolda, is when a man is not conscious of what he's doing. In other words, either he does it accidentally or he's sleeping. And we brought this principle to prove that man is mu'at, meaning full damages occur whether a person intends to do the damage or not, which is a very important principle. So, which we also learned in the beginning of the Bava Kamma, when it brings the case of Av and Toldos, and it goes into Gemara Shabbos, and it says even if man accidentally, b'shoigeg, unwittingly breaks Shabbos, he still has to bring a korban chatas. And even with regards to Tuma, if he either touched the corpse or accidentally touched somebody that touched the corpse, he's also in the state of Tuma. So if a person ingests poison, whether you're not meant to ingest poison, the poison will still get you. So as far as the toldo being man sleeping, it shows that he's still mu'ad. Full payment is required, not partial, because we do not exonerate him on the fact that he wasn't conscious of what he was doing, because he should have made provisions for that. So that's an excellent question. In terms of a person's mucus or saliva, that's coming to bring a different point. That's coming to bring a point that whether it's in the midst of travel and it causes damage, just like when one hurtles a stone through a brick window, you could turn around and say the stone did it. It's coming from man's force. Therefore, if man causes indirect damage, he's still liable for payment. And even if one creates a destructive force upon resting, he's still responsible for that consequence. He can't say the stone hurtled on its own, or I hit a cricket ball that was thrown to me, therefore I was just defending myself, etc. Because that's man's force that has created the damage. And we see there that it's still a case where they're mu'at, where they fully have to make payment, irrespective of whether it was their force or their actual direct action. Have I made that clear, guys?
100%.
Yeah.
Crystal.
And I want to ask, can I ask one final point?
Yeah.
Man's nature is to to claim it, and it can be true in certain instances, to claim that he's not aware of the law.
Okay, good point. It's digressing a bit. We'll answer it and then we'll move on. Is that that's irrelevant. When you sign a contract, and in fact, just hold me, I'm going to get one of my contracts, business contracts, and it's interesting because it says on the front, acceptance of order. I've read and understood the clauses, overleaf, and agree to the same. Part of civil law is that you have to have a clause stating that whether or not a person has read it or not, in terms of a contractual obligation, the onus is on them to read it, and they can't claim misrepresentation if there are terms and conditions written in a contract. That's number one. And ignorance is no excuse. You know that there's a particular part we say in the Yom Kippur davening that says that when we're doing a kapora for our sins, we can say that ignorance of the law is no excuse. You can't say, well, I didn't know the laws of Shabbos, therefore I broke Shabbos, it's not my fault. The obligation is on you to learn those particular laws and what Hashem requires of you. If a person doesn't have the mental capacity, both in terms of intelligence, or they're criminally insane or civilly insane, and they can't function, those are extenuating circumstances. But anybody of reasonable or average or even low intelligence has to be able to know what is expected of them, both from the country and from Hashem. And ignorance is no excuse. I can tell you something now. If you commit homicide, no, God forbid you, if a person commits homicide and then said they didn't know killing was wrong in that country, good luck trying to get a defense for it. It's not an excuse. It's up to you to know the laws of the country. Otherwise, you're going to feel the full wrath of the law. And so too with Hashem's law.
Can I just mention, but now Hashem's law it's ginormous compared to the laws of a country. So the Torah is not verbose. It's got so much laws inside it. It's nearly impossible for a human being, the average human being, the average from Jew even, to know all the laws of Shabbos, all the laws of damages. I think it's impossible. I mean, it's just so much.
It's not true. It's not true because
am I wrong?
You're absolutely wrong because firstly, Hashem judges each person on their mental capacity, at what stage they became a Baal Tshuva, their level of effort, etc. And it's Hashem that makes that judgment call. And only because Hashem can read mind and ability and the point at which somebody has progressed is Hashem able to make that judgment call, number one. And number two, Hashem said, these laws that I've given you are not beyond your reach. These are the reach of every man, woman, and child to study and to adhere to according to their level and what they're obligated to in their particular category. It's clear. And the thing of it is, you're also judged on your ethical standards, meaning it's not just adhering to the laws between man and God, it's between the laws of man and man. So there's so many factors to take into account, but it says it is all our obligation to start the process, but we are not free to discharge ourselves from it, and yet we might not complete it in our lifetime. So we are obligated, Gavin.
Okay, I get it, 100%. All right.
And Hashem will judge. In other words, if a person becomes a Baal Tshuva at 50, then up until that point, they're known as ignorant, and they're judged from that point, and they're judged on effort. I can't judge you. Or Hashem can judge me, and Hashem can judge you, etc., etc. But it's not that vast. And in fact, many Baal Tshuvas err on the side of overcaution just to be safe. Okay, let's move on. Have I answered that adequately?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. That was a good answer.
Sure,
Thank you.
Okay, has anybody else got any questions? I think Marco had a question.
Just while we of what Mava is, why are we going this back route? And the other thing is, I wasn't quite sure yesterday when you started relating Mava to Shane. I didn't see the relationship between what you're trying to get at. I don't know if that's a clear question.
What do you mean going backwards? Firstly, let me understand what you mean by going backwards.
Why can't we just get a straight definition of Mave? Why is this? It could be something living, it could be something not living, and then it came up with mankind being awake or asleep. Is that what it is? So what is Mave? Because it was like a question mark right from the beginning. But is this what it is? Mankind awake or asleep, or is that finally what? That's what I mean. We define what it is exactly. And why.
Okay. No. All right. So what I'm going to do quickly is do a summary to unpack the issue for you, because there quite a few issues at play here. So
sorry, in the Shane relationship, I just don't understand that.
Yeah, and then afterwards you had a question about Pitt, which we'll get to now. But let's first get to this issue of what Mave is. Okay. So firstly, when it says in the Mishnah, the whole of Bava Kamma starts out with the first Mishnah that says these are the 4 primary damages, and it refers to Ashur, which was the ox, Habor, which was the pit, Mave, and Have. And Have was defined as fire. The only question mark is it didn't explain what Mave is. So there obviously has to be a point in the Gemara where they say, well, what is it? And if it was that clear and straightforward, it would have given a one-word definition for it in the very beginning. We have to examine what this is. And so the Gemara is going to unpack it in the number of daf to say, well, is it according to Shmuel that says Mave refers to shame? Or is it according to Rav that says Mave refers to man? And the thing of it is we've got to see why Shmuel says it refers to shame, meaning the tooth, and Rav refers to man. And we're doing it by doing two different routes. The one is scriptural sourcing. In other words, where do each of them derive their scriptural sourcing? Because logic aside, scripture always overthrows logic. And I'll tell you why in a minute. And then we have to see, well, logically, how does one not adhere to the other's logic? So one has to be patient with the process of the Gemara, because this is a journey we're going through on. This is not halacha. Halacha is a case where you're learning what are the bottom line facts of the law that we have to adhere to. And what the Gemara does and the Mishnah does is it explains the legal cases that we're dealing with and the clarity of definitions. That's the very basis of Gemara, which although is in a way seeming to be frustrating, there can be a beauty to it because you understand why the law is derived, how it's derived, and sometimes that can be more beautiful to see. I don't know if you've ever seen, sometimes when you see a finished sculpture, it's pretty, but when you see how a guy took a stone slab that was square, it had nothing, and carved out of it, if you take Rodin, the sculptor, and he carved out the thinker, which is a guy obviously resting his hand on his chin. It looks absolutely magnificent, but he's working from a block of stone. And it's that magnificence of seeing how do you create something from nothing. It's almost a creative act. Only Hashem can create something from nothing, but we create something from something. Only man can do that. Ex nihilo is a concept that Hashem can create something from nothing. But there's a beauty to see in it. There's always YouTube videos of how somebody did an amazing piece of art or painting. I'm not saying that the end product isn't beautiful, but there's a certain beauty and appreciation of seeing how it came together that's sometimes more fascinating than the end result. I don't know if you agree. That's what I love about Gemara.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Can I interrupt?
Sure. Well, we start on Michael's question.
It's directly related to that.
Yeah.
The Shulchan Aruch, is that the end product as far as the halachas go? Is the whole Shulchan Aruch derived from the Gemaras?
You've got two. You've got the Mishnah Brura and the Shulchan Aruch. The Mishnah Brura deals with only certain chapters of the Shulchan Aruch. Now, the Shulchan Aruch can't be confused with the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which is another set of two books which deals with the daily halacha that are incumbent upon every Jew. from the minute he wakes up to the minute he goes to bed. Shulchan Aruch itself creates additional chapters that are not covered in the Mishnah Brura, such as Kibbud Av V'Aim and the laws of Tzedakah. The Mishnah Brura is more an espousing of mitzvahs like brachas, etc. Okay, I don't want to digress too much. Does that make sense?
Okay, but does it all stem, what I'm saying is, does it all stem from, how did they get that information? From reading the Gemara?
That I don't want to, because it's a sheer all on its own. But suffice to say that both the, when you've got the Mishnah, when you've got the Shulchan Aruch, it does quote the Gemara, yeah, it does, and Chumash. Sorry, I just don't want to lose track of what Michael said. We need to have another shir, which is not a Gemara-based shir, or I need to send you guys a clip on YouTube how everything was derived. Where's Rashi on the page, where's Tosfot, what comes from what, etc. But just to concentrate, and Gavin, that's not an important question, just because I don't want to lose track in my memory of what Michael said, I want to just unpack, according to Rav and Shmuel, quickly what we're talking about here. Of a definition.
Sorry for the interruption.
It's not an interruption. We just have to cover it. It's an important question. I just don't. It's my memory that I don't want to lose track. Yeah. It's not that the question isn't important, so I must apologize.
No. I'm apologizing for disturbing you, not so much for the question. I apologize.
Okay. So all right. So just to quickly unravel this, in the following dafim that are going to come up, we are going to deal with, please God, this week, the source of what Shmuel does to say that it comes, it's the category of shame. And we're going to come to the scriptural sourcing of why Rav says it's the category of man. Before we come to the scriptural sourcing, what we're discussing here are concepts. Okay? Both of these are tanoim, so these are big guns. So this question isn't a minor question. It's the essence of it. All right, so just to explain here, according to Rav, 1 second, is that the Gemara first wants to propose that what are we trying to establish here in greater context? We're trying to say Rav Papa brought a statement in the beginning. He said that there are some toldos that are like the avos, some subcategories that are like the primary categories, and some subcategories that are different or dissimilar to the primary categories. And we went through Keren, Shane, and Regal for Ox. We're still going to go through Pit, which we did do after this issue of Maveh. And we, at this case of Maveh, we'll be looking at the Tordus and the Av yesterday. And what we said was that when we're looking at the Torda, the first thing the Gemara wants to propose is that a sleeping man is a Torda of a man that is awake. And then we learned, just as a bottom line, that a man is always muad, whether awake or asleep. So muad means fully warned, meaning there is full payment due, whether he causes damage in his sleep or whether he's awake. The reason being is that before he goes to sleep, he has to take care that if it's in somebody else's house, that he needs to make sure that there are no utensils that he can break, because in his sleep, he has no control. He is going to thrash around. That's the default position. So he has to assume that's going to be the default position. The same thing as Arthur brought very, very smartly yesterday, that what happens if there's no light? Well, if you're going to somebody for Shabbos, you call them before Shabbos and say, listen, do you have lights on a timer that go off in the room? And if he says yes, well then when you go to him after shul, you've got light before all the lights go off in the house to make sure there are no utensils. And if he says no, the bedrooms have no light, but there's only a timing switch in the dining room, you say to him, listen, I thrash around in my sleep. Please make sure there's no mink vases there, because I don't want to sell my car to pay for your mink vase. So that's what it's coming to prove, that there it's a case that the Torda is exactly the same as the Av, according to Rav Papa, because you're still fully responsible for full damages. And in that way, the Torda subcategory resembles the primary category, the Av, and you're fully responsible for full payment, not partial payment. And therefore, there's no difference between the Av and the Torda. The Gemara wants to propose that maybe The subcategory is man's saliva or spit, for example, mucus. And that if he spits at something, leaves a stone or plays with a cricket bat and it hits the neighbor's window, can't turn around and say, well, I'm not responsible because it was the ball that did it, it was the stone that did it, it was your force that propelled it. And what the Torah is coming to prove there, that Torah is the same as the Av. So this is not a case where Rav Papa is talking about where they're dissimilar. When the mucus or spit comes to rest, what Gavin brought yesterday, a very good point, and what Marcus suggested at first, is Marcus suggested, I asked a question yesterday and I said, when the spit lands, what do you classify it? And Marcus quite rightly said pit. And then Gavin said it's pit because one can slip on it. And any hazard that's created in the public domain where man is posed to injure himself, because from inception, any category of pit, both the Torah and the Av, that are in a public place, are prone to injure or kill, and therefore are a public hazard, and it's also stationary, and that's what makes it a category of pit. So what we're learning in reference to this is that if it's in force, it's a category of man, and then the Torah, the same as the Av, you're fully responsible. So man is not the case where Rav Papa is talking about. And when we say according to Shmuel that it's tooth, we've already discussed that if it's shame, if according to Rav Papa, where he says that ox is referring to Keren and then Mava is referring to shame, then we already discussed a shame where the tooth, the tortoise resemble the same in other words, if the animal does it for physical gratification, whether it was the tortoise or the Av, you're responsible for full payment either way. Then when it comes to the mucus landing, for example, and we say it's pit, we're going to go through pit now, which we did yesterday, and we said whether it's the Torah or the Av, you still pay full damages. Is that absolutely clear that these are not the cases Rav Papa is talking about?
Yes.
That is brilliantly explained. Thank you.
Thank you.
100%. Got it.
Okay, now Marco had a very interesting question because he said to me, and I had a phone call with him, and he mentioned a question about he didn't quite understand, which I still have to keep reading it and work it out. So what this thing of it is that there was a case of what's this thing about it's your object, it's not your object, you haven't let go of the fact that it's your possession or not in pit. Is that what you were asking, Mark, on the phone? And so we can go through it.
Yeah, I'm trying to work out what I was asking, and I'm not.
Well, what you were asking exactly.
Yeah.
What you were asking exactly is as follows: is you were saying you can understand why the 10 tefach pit and the 9 tefach pit are both an Av because they're both scriptural sources for both. So when the Gemara originally mentions that, suggesting that maybe the 9 tefach pit is a Torah, and then the 10 tefach pit is the Av, and the Gemara says, no, we realize that that's not the case because according to scriptural source, there is reference to both the case of damaging, therefore damaging is an Av because it's mentioned scripturally, and so is the capacity to kill, which is mentioned scripturally because you have to make restitution for both. But then it brings a case where it discusses the Torah of pit, and the Torah of pit is actually a person's stone, knife, or burden, which he places in the public domain and they cause damage. So let me just review Michael's question quickly.
Yeah, so just to interrupt, yes, no, great. Okay, so we got to that conclusion that it could only be the Av. because of the scripture, and now we're trying to find the toldos. Right? And then you came up with the knife and the stone, etc.
Not me. The Gemara came up with the
Gemara
stone.
came up with that.
Yeah.
So it came up with that because it's looking at what aspect of it now? Is it looking at something that is, I'm just trying to think of the relationship now.
I'll tell you the relationship. I'll tell it to you. That the relationship is as follows. It's not only a pit that somebody brings up. Anything that a person does in the public domain that from inception is prone to damage is a torda of pit. Anything that the Gemara, that the scriptural source mentions mufurish, straight out, is only the pit. It's using an example where if there's if there's a pit that's covered and you uncover it, it wasn't prone to damage, but you now enacted it to damage. Therefore, you're responsible even if you didn't dig the pit, if you uncovered it. And therefore, it brings the pit for that particular reason. But it's saying, listen, there are a host of objects that you could leave in the public domain, from spitting, where a person can slip, to a personal possession. They call a burden because if it's too heavy to carry, it's burdensome. So you just dump it there. And then somebody injures themselves against it in the public domain. It's prone to damage. Nobody's looking out for your particular object where they can injure themselves. So a torda is any other person's possessions that cause damage in the public domain. That's why it's bringing the tordas.
And obviously it's something that's stationary. It's something that just lies there. So knife, stones, etc. would be a perfect example.
Correct.
And to take it one step further, all right. So using that example, you started examining the whole idea of whether it's owned or not owned. And just tell me, go with your thinking there. Just explain that again. And then you said whether it's not owned or whether it's owned.
Yes, I'm going to go through our thinking there. I just want to ask Arthur one particular second. Arthur, how much time do we have left?
7 minutes and 25 seconds.
Perfect. It's enough to answer this question. So this is the thinking. There are two different opinions. Okay. Now, according to Rav and Shmuel, if it's, and I'm going to explain what this means. If it's considered ownerless, like somebody doesn't particularly care about that object. Both Rav and Shmuel, now don't confuse this with the Rav and Shmuel with regard to the argument of Maveh. We finished on Maveh. We're dealing with the issue of pit. It's not the first time Rav and Shmuel are going to argue. Okay, so we dealt with Maveh. We're getting to a case of pit here. And Anakul asked a good question. What he did say is, he said, what does it have to do with the fact that you cause damage with regards to a pit? Whether your items that you left that caused damage in a public place, what does it have to do with the fact of whether or not it's ownerless or you own it? What are we getting at here? What's the difference? It causes damage. Is that your question, Michael? Maybe I got it wrong.
Yeah, that is the question. That is the question.
Good. Did I miss something? If I missed something...
No, you're on the right track. Just carry on. Carry on with your thought process. Yeah.
Fine. So what we're going to do now is address who says what. Now, often you'll have a case of where Rav and Shmuel disagree. They are both big guns. It doesn't get bigger. They're both Tanoim. Okay. So this is the case. The Gemara starts off and it wants to examine this fact, and it says, so what are the circumstances? So if the owner declared the items ownerless, then both according to Rav and Shmuel, this is a case of pit. So they don't argue in a case where it's ownerless. This is something that you've got to be clear about. They only have an argument where it's not considered ownerless, where a person hasn't given it up.
Can I stop you for a sec? Sorry. So if it's ownerless, they don't have an issue when it's ownerless.
Correct.
I'm making the assumption that the Avner told us are different, because I assume if it's ownerless, they're not responsible.
No, 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 no. It's not the case. Let me just repeat what I'm saying. You are always responsible. Always
Okay.
responsible. If it's
Okay.
in a public place that causes hazard, death or damage, you're responsible. But the issue we're going to discuss now is what sort of damage responsibility there is. So firstly, there's no question if it's a case of it's ownerless, because nobody digs a pit unless you're insane and say, I own the pit, I own the pit. You know, it's public property. So for example, the municipality that digs a pit, the worker that digs the pit for the municipality isn't proud of the fact that he's put sewage in there. It's owned by the municipality, an underground tunnel. And obviously on top of it should be a manhole so as not to cause damage.
Okay.
If there's already a pit there and somebody removes the manhole and somebody falls into the pit, that person removing the manhole is responsible, not the person that dug the pit, because he ensured that the pit was covered. So nobody, unless they're insane, is proud of the fact that they created a pit. It happens to be a public hazard.
But take the example of somebody leaving a knife in a public domain, and it's been lying there, and someone finds it. That's a situation of the knife not having an owner, and that's a case where no responsibility can be assigned to anybody, and therefore it'd be a case of where there's no responsibility on the part of the person that may have owned it.
No. In fact, the converse. Okay, so just give me a little bit of a chance to unpack it. But I understand where the confusion is, because you don't understand, well, what's the whole confusion then in terms of responsibility? Because the Gemara's proof from the case of pit already that when you don't own something, you're fully responsible. Because the default position would be, since I don't own it, it's not my problem. So that's the first case that the others coming to bring that. Listen, you might not think it's valuable to you that you now own it, but it is your problem because it damaged.
Okay.
So that's the less intuitive case. You're completely correct. Is that you think, I don't own it, not my problem. If it damaged you, it's nothing to do with me. So the Gemara always teaches the less novel case first. The obvious cases are more difficult. So the Gemara is going to say, well, listen, if you own it, obviously it's your responsibility. You know what I mean? But what we're going to discuss here is how this unravels. So if you give me a fraction of a second, we're going to do it. Now, just one thing is that when it brings a case of a stone, a knife, and a burden, generally people, maybe in a case of a stone, you're not going to really marvel at it and say, well, I own the stone, because the stones might be a dime a dozen. However, you get certain sort of stones that sharpen knives or semi-precious stones that somebody walked in it and it damaged their foot or whatever the case may be, where somebody doesn't declare it ownerless. I'll give you a perfect example that Rabbi Cohen gave me. Is he said somebody's driving a bakkie down the highway and they've got goods on the top. And those goods come off, like a guy's carrying packed on top of it Persian carpets. And those Persian carpets are worth a lot of money. Now, suddenly that thing flies off and it lands on the road and it gets mangled in somebody's tire and the car flips. That is a bit of a problem, because the person sees their object as valuable, those Persian carpets. They haven't declared it ownerless. And especially if the one mangles a car, but there 5 or 6 other Persians on the highway, the guy's going to stop the bakkie and try and hold traffic to collect them if they're worth $5,000 a piece. And on this basis, we're going to unpack the case now. And then I'm going to just explain to it a little bit more clearly. If you give me a fraction of a sec and I unpack it, it's then going to make more sense. Okay. So there's no dispute as far as if an object is ownerless. Rav and Shmuel don't have a dispute. Why don't they have a dispute? Because in the case of pit itself, it is ownerless. Nobody owns a pit. You're just creating a hazard in the public domain. So they don't have an issue with it, with each other, as far as something that's ownerless. The only time they have an issue is if somebody hasn't given up ownership of the item. So, for example, the Persian carpets that come off a bakkie in the middle of a highway, or a person's knife, because a person's knife might be a professional set of butcher's knives, which are very expensive, a couple of grand a knife. Or they might be mechanical tools. that Chedore, you got those mechanical tools that are like 20 grand for a set. I'm not talking about the macro special here. I'm talking about the real tools. So in that case, somebody's not going to declare ownership, and if that goes is in the public domain, they're not going to want to buy a new set of tools. So again, the reason why Shmuel and Rav don't have a problem where it's ownerless is because nobody owns a pit. It's a hazard in a public domain. So let's talk about a case where it's owned. Does everybody understand why there's no objection to a case that's ownerless?
No, fine with it.
I'm fine.
Yeah, okay, so yes, Gavin is fine with it. Not no, you're fine with it. Yes, you are fine with it. No means you're not. Yes, you fine with it?
Yes, I'm fine with it.
Great. Michael, you fine with that? That there's no dispute with Rav and Shmuel if it's ownerless. Now we're discussing if it's owned. Okay? So this is how it unravels. It unravels in the following way. So according to Shmuel here, he doesn't have an issue with where a person owns it or declares it ownerless. He's saying if it's a public hazard, you have to pay. If it's a public hazard, you have to pay. He's not interested. He's saying, you could say that you own it or you don't own it. If it created damage, you're paying. And that's the bottom line. There's not even an issue as far as that's concerned. The issue is according to Rav. Now, according to Rav, if it's a case of a person owned it, he puts it according to ox. And we're going to see why now. Because ox is a case where it's a person's property. And a pit is not a case where it's a person's property. Can you just see this so far?
Yeah.
Gavin, Arthur?
No, but there are a pit, a literal pit is not an object, but your knife, your stone, etc., are objects.
No, it's not an issue of whether it's an object or not, because a pit is an object. It is an object. The fact that it's got a manhole is like a pot with a lid. It is an object. The fact
it's an object. So then, what's wrong with Rav Papa? I mean, he's got a good point.
It's not Rav Papa. You're mixing up Rav and Rav Papa.
Sorry, Rav.
Okay, so let me just tell you what I'm saying. Rather than consider that, let's rather than use the word object, let's rather use the word obstacle. Okay, so there's obstacles that you own and obstacles that you don't own. So the case of pit is a case of an obstacle you created that you do not own in the public domain that is prone to damage from its inception. Do you get that? Now, your knife, your burden, and your stone is an obstacle that you happen to own that, again, is prone to damage from inception if left in the public domain. Do you get that?
Mm-hmm. Get that.
So let's replace the word object with obstacle, because that'll take away Gavin's question.
Mm-hmm.
Gav?
No,
but I need your response, because I don't know if you're still confused or not.
No, 100%. I was going to use the word obstruction, but your word's just as good.
Well, it's the word of the Gemara. Okay,
probably a better word, yeah.
So let's just keep this clear again. So Shmuel says it doesn't matter whether all obstacles in the public domain, even ones that were not declared ownerless, are a hazard that you cause to the public, because it's prone to inception from the minute it's left there. So Shmuel said whether you own it or it's ownerless, whose phone's doing that?
Yeah, sorry. Let me sort that out. Yeah.
So that's not a case. Shmuel doesn't have a problem if it's owned or ownerless. Rav has a problem. Rav wants to say that a pit is ownerless. So therefore, if it's your particular object that you own, then it can't be a case of pit. It has to be a case of ox, because an ox is damage that you owned. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we've already said then, according to Tosfot, Tosfot brings a commentary and said, listen, what Rav is referring to here is Rav's a smart man, is that he knows that ox is different to inanimate objects, because an ox moves. So its damage is caused when it's moving. And if you leave a Persian carpet in the middle of the road, or you leave your knife, your stone, or your burden, that's an inanimate object. So Rav is intelligent, and he's not assuming that it's the same case of damage. Rather, he's saying that it's ox in the sense that it's your property. And what he's doing is he's doing a derivation of combining the principle of ox, meaning it's your property, with the principle of pit. And the common characteristics is that it causes damage. It causes damage. So he's using an amalgamation, a combination of pit and ox in order to derive the principle. Because he's clearly aware that the one's inanimate and the one is animate. And what are we saying here? So what's the bottom line? So if you want to say, according to Rav, that a person's obstacles that are not declared ownerless are like ox, in that they're his property, we learned that the subcategories of ox, both in Keren, Shane, and Regel, are like the primary category in terms of payment level. Okay? So this is not a case where Rav Papa is talking about. Because if you want to say, according to Rav, whether it's where it's owned by somebody, and he wants to use ox as a derivation, we've already seen that the oven and the tortoise are the same. So Rav Papa's not talking about that. When you're talking about Shmuel, who said if it's owned, it doesn't matter, it's in a public place, we learned that the subcategories of pit and the primary categories of pit are the same, because, again, both the av and the tortoise are the same. And when they both agree that if it's ownerless, whether it's the tortoise and av, they're the same, again, the avs are the same. Because what does this mean? It's mean, again, the av and the tortoise have got three commonalities according to Rav Papa. From its very inception, they're prone to damage. They're stationary. They're your responsibility for having caused it, or your property, and the obligation of watching it is on you. Therefore, the laws of the Torah and the Av are identical. So this is not a case where Rav Papa is talking about.
Sorry, at that moment, I've got a problem with my phone. Okay, I just must switch you here. Sorry. Okay, okay, I'm going to listen to this last part again. I was just disturbed by the phone. Please don't repeat this, because it's going to waste time. But I see where you're going with it. All right.
Okay, does everybody else understand, or do you want me to repeat it for a minute? Just give you a bottom line. Guys?
Yeah, just give him the bottom line.
Yeah, the bottom line will be good.
Fine. Marco, are you with us now?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, good. So this is what we're saying. We're saying whichever way you look at it, according to Rav Papa, the Tordos and the Avos are the same, so pit is not a case where we're referring to it. Because if you look at it according to Shmuel and Rav, they all agree, based on the case of a pit, that when it's ownerless, because a pit is ownerless, nobody proudly claims this is my pit. It's a hazard created in the public domain, an obstacle. Mm-hmm. In that particular case, we see that the Tordos and the Av are the same. So, for example, somebody might consider the stone they left in the road not particularly valuable. So the Av and the Torah, they're the same. If you want to say, like Shmuel, that the person hasn't given up ownership, that for them the item is precious and they want to actually recover it. So we said the case of a Baki, the Persian carpets that come off, the five that come in the road, and the guy's taking three of them to reload it, and the fourth one, he doesn't get a chance to do it, and it mangles under somebody's tire and the car flips. Then because it's been precious to him, then that's the argument that Rav and Shmuel have. Because Shmuel is saying, listen, it doesn't matter whether you considered it that you owned it. It's still an obstacle in a public domain, and all obstacles in the public domain, you're responsible for that it causes damage. According to Rav, he was saying that it doesn't resemble pit in that it's this person's object. It's not like a pit where it's just an obstacle. And so he's comparing it to ox. And Tosfot brings the commentary that Rav is a very smart guy, and that we're not saying that Rav is unaware of the fact that a person's burden in the road, their knife, their stone, etc., is animate like an ox, because an ox only creates damage when it's moving, whereas a pit is stationary. What he's saying is, just like you're responsible with the tortoise and the av in a case with an ox, when it's your property, so too with pit, you're responsible whether you declare it affectionately yours or not yours. And he's using a combination of pit and carrying to determine that. Does that make sense? And then according to Rav Papa, whichever way you look at it, the av and the tortoise are the same. In other words, you're fully responsible for the hazard, the obstruction that you cause in a public domain.
Okay.
Makes sense.
So they both agree, but they both, Shmuel and Rav, are using sort of different. Rav's adding an example with the ox to kind of prove his point in the end. But in terms of, the av and the tortoise are the same. I mean, responsible in all situations. With the pit, using the pit example, using the ox example, it's just a different way of deriving the same principle. Is that correct?
Yeah, so even at the point that they disagreed in terms of objects that one owns, we can say that even if Rav wants to say it's like ox because it's your property, you're still responsible because the torda of ox and the others of ox are identical in terms of full payment.
Right. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, so has anybody got any questions on yesterday's stuff? Any questions further?
No. Clear.
Yeah.
Michael, clear?
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So let me just get rid of these issues. Just give me 1 second. Let me just see where we are now. Okay. Sorry, guys. I'll just tell you what dot we're on now. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we've got one more category left to deal with. What category is that? That's the category of fire. Now, with regards to the category of fire, what are we saying here? The Gemara wants to identify the subcategories of fire, because Rav Papa is going to ask the same thing. On not that Rav Papa doesn't know. We don't know if Rav Papa is talking about fire now, because we've gone through ox, we've gone through pit, we've gone through mave, and we can see that the tortoise and the av are the same in terms of the full responsibility of payment. So now there's only one case left, it would seem, and that would be have, fire. Is that correct?
Right.
Fine.
Right.
We're saying, what are the subcategories of fire? And the subcategories of fire are stone, knife, and burden. So now we're a little bit confused because we're saying, hang on, I thought we covered this in pit. And what we're saying here is we're saying, no, this is a case where it's in motion. So, for example, if you have a look, just like a man is responsible if he hurtles a stone, and it's actually his force that causes it, so we say that a stone, a knife, and a burden that's in motion, placed on top of his roof, that fell in a normal wind causes damage, is fire. We're going to see now how it's called, why it's the category of fire. So in other words, we're taking the same things as before, a stone, a knife, and a burden. So what we're saying is, let's look at what actually makes fire unique. So what makes fire unique is the fact that it needs another force mixed with it in order to inflict the damage. So I create a fire, but there's no wind at all. It's not, and obviously there's two parts to a fire. There's the fact that the fire can catch on flammable other objects and the fact that there's a wind. But obviously you're responsible if you create a flammable situation where it can move from place to place. But most of incidents on the fire in agricultural societies were created at a position where it could leave your property and go to the neighbor's property because of a factor of carrying that fire, another force that carried that fire, which is wind. In other words, people cooked their food and they created like, they created like a pit sometimes, and they put in coal and then lit it and then cooked their food on top, or they created a fire on the sandy ground. They wouldn't exactly create a fire in a place where the whole field would catch alight, because even if they hated their neighbor, they don't want their field to catch alight. They don't want their house to burn down. So anybody with common sense builds a fire in a place where it is safe and it's not going to spread from the flammability point of view. What happens is a fire generally is caused when it's not watched correctly, but what actually carries the fire? It's the negligence aspect, because you're not watching it. But what actually, you can watch it all day. If there's no wind that's mixed within the fire, there's no way the fire can travel, according to the Gemara. Would everybody agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gavin, Arthur?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, Marco, you were going to ask something on that. You might as well ask.
No, perfect. Well, you need oxygen, you need wind for it to combust and to continue firing. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, look, we're not talking in a case, obviously in these halachas were derived on planet Earth. It's not in a solar system that's devoid of oxygen. So the default position is there's oxygen. So that's for sure. So that's the case. But the other factors is obviously flammable material around. But because a person doesn't want their own property to burn or get damaged, they will not create a fire where it damages their own property, even if they hate the neighbor. So obviously, if you have flammable material, that goes without saying that you're responsible there either way. Yeah. But most people were cautious. They had a stone or a sandy area where you would cook your food daily. And then they would have, and they generally do it outside so that you wouldn't have smoke inhalation. Mm-hmm. And if you're watching a fire, people would always keep buckets of water or something to douse the fire afterwards so it wouldn't spread to their property, because they don't want their own property damaged, even if they hate the neighbor. So the negligence of not watching the fire is causative. But what causes the fire to spread is the fact that it's mixed with another factor. And the Gemara says that factor is wind. It's just wind. Right. If there's no wind at all, it can't start to spread. So what is the case that we're talking about here is the Torah, is that somebody placed an object on their roof and there was a normal wind and they placed their stone enough and they built it on their roof. So why would they do this? So say you're fixing your roof and you've got tools on your roof. And while you were fixing your roof, you left it on the edge of a roof, because you must remember a roof is generally convex. It like points downwards. If you go off the roof, you have lunch, and all of a sudden, you hear somebody screaming because your mallet that was used to smack down the tile on the roof ended up clapping a person down there in the hay, and they pouring with blood. So based on that particular aspect, you're responsible. But you're only responsible in a case the Gemara brings when it's a normal wind. In other words, if it's an abnormal wind, which nobody could have predicted, and this thing flies off, and you don't have your neighbors around your immediate property, and this thing flies off completely and claps somebody in the head, like a roof comes off and actually damages somebody else's car. That's a tornado wind. In that case, you're not responsible because it's not your fault. It's not negligence. So we're talking about a case where it's normal. And the same thing with the bakkie. If a bakkie is traveling and a tool comes off while you're at the car behind and it flies off a vehicle and it hits your particular car windshield, or a stone that comes off of the bakkie flies off and cracks your windshield, that's not an example of pit because it's not stationary, it's traveling. And therefore, that's a category of a subcategory of fire. Okay? We've got about 8 minutes left. So I'm saying the subcategory of fire is exactly the same as the primary category of fire, meaning that another force that was mixed into it is the wind. And the fact of it is it's traveled. It's your property. And if you want to say fire is not your property, well, it's your hazard. So whatever word whatever thing you want to say, with property or your hazard, you were the catalyst that set up that situation. And the obligation of watching is in you. And therefore, there's no reason to differentiate in law between the primary category and the subcategory, because you're responsible in both cases for full payment. Does that make sense?
Makes sense?
Yeah.
According to Rav Papa, we don't understand here, since we determined that the subcategories of fire and the primary categories are the same, and there's no difference between the oven and the toldos, what could Rav Papa be talking about? Because we seem to have gone through every category of primary damage in the Mishnah. Does that make sense? Every category. So based on the fact that
So when you say then what is Rav Papa talking about?
So every state from the beginning, we stated that Rav Papa stated in the beginning of it says, what are the cases where the Toldos and the Av are similar, and what are the cases where the Toldos and the Av are dissimilar?
Okay, so there's obviously something that's dissimilar.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And we're trying to find out what that is.
Yes, and
we
we've
haven't
gone
found
through
out
every
so
list.
far. Yeah.
Yeah, but the problem is we've gone through every list, so we're now very confused.
Right.
We were hoping it would come up. When we went through the category of Karen, we thought it might come up in Shane. It wasn't in Shane. We thought it was in Rego. And we said, okay, so it's not in Ox. Is it in Pit? We found out it wasn't in Pit. Then we said, well, is it in Marva? And we found it wasn't in Marva. So we thought it has to be in fire because that's the last category.
Right.
And it hasn't been in fire. So now we're terribly confused as a case that Rav Papa could be talking about and where it's dissimilar.
Right.
Where the other told us are not the same.
Right.
So, on that suspenseful note, what we're going to do is end off and say, well, what could he be talking about? And I just want to wish Israel a happy Independence Day. It's a miracle from Hashem that we still have the land of Israel. And thank you, everybody, for the share, and thank you for your contributing questions. And it's lovely to see you today, and we'll look forward, please God, to seeing each other tomorrow.
Thank you. Thanks for the preparation and your time, Damon.
Pleasure, guys. Pleasure. Thanks to all of you that participated in the questions, and thanks for everything. And we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.